So you've got this massive protest flooding the streets of London, and it's sparking this huge debate about the very identity of the nation. But what really gets over 100,000 people out on the streets like that? Let's dig into the forces behind this really powerful display.
Right. When you see a crowd this big, you just know it's not about one simple thing. So we're going to break down what sparked it, what happened afterwards, and here's the kicker: why this one protest in London actually has ripple effects that go way, way beyond the UK.
All right, first up, let's just wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this thing and who is pulling the strings.
110,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. I mean, that's enough to pack Wembley Stadium to the rafters. We're talking about a huge, huge gathering and a very powerful statement.
Okay, so the event was called Unite the Kingdom, and it was put together by the well-known far-right activist Tommy Robinson. He's a figure with some really strong views on nationalism and immigration, and yeah, the sheer size of it, that puts it on the map as one of the biggest right-wing protests the UK has seen in a long, long time.
So what actually gets a crowd that big all in one place? You know, every big movement has that one thing, that spark that lights the whole fire. Let's take a look at what it was here.
Well, it seems the immediate trigger boiled down to a couple of key things. First, a lot of people were really unhappy about asylum seekers being housed in hotels, and second, there was this bigger growing frustration with the government's whole approach to immigration.
And believe me, this was not a quiet march. People who were there described it as a sea of national flags, with chants all about national identity echoing through the streets. It was a very loud, very public statement.
Now, whenever you have tensions running this high and crowds this big, you know there are going to be consequences. So let's look at what happened when things got heated.
Yeah, the protest didn't stay peaceful for long. Clashes broke out with the police, and the result was pretty grim. Dozens of police officers were injured just doing their jobs, and a whole lot of arrests were made.
So how did officials react? Well, the UK's opposition leader, Keir Starmer, had to walk a pretty fine line. He was clear in defending the right to peaceful protest, that's a given, but he came down really hard on the violence, especially the attacks on the police.
But it wasn't just about politicians' statements. Critics of the march started raising some really serious alarms. They were worried that this kind of event, especially with that kind of leadership, could end up stoking the flames of xenophobia and creating even deeper racial divides in the country.
Okay, so to really get what's going on here, we have to look past the slogans on the banners, right? We need to dive a little deeper into what's bubbling under the surface of this whole movement.
And this is where it gets really complex, because you basically have two completely different stories being told. On the one hand, supporters are saying, look, the government is just not listening to our real fears about how immigration is affecting our economy and our lives. But on the other hand, critics are looking at the far-right involvement and saying, hang on, this isn't just about policy anymore. This is a deliberate shift towards a politics of us versus them, a politics of exclusion.
You know, it would be really easy to just file this away as a UK story, but the ideas and the tensions we're seeing here, they're popping up all over the world.
And this is maybe the most important thing to get. What happened in London is not some isolated event. It's like a local flare-up of a much bigger global fire.
Just think about these three words for a second: migration, national identity, security. Sound familiar? It absolutely should, because these are the exact same hot-button issues being debated in countries literally all across the globe right now.
So why should you care if you don't live in the UK? Well, because movements like this can have very, very real consequences. They can influence elections, they can force governments to totally rewrite their immigration policies, and they can fundamentally change how whole nations deal with the really tough question of asylum seekers.
And all of this really leaves us with a huge question, one that's defining our era. As more and more people are on the move around the world, how are countries going to juggle these three competing demands: security, national identity, and fair policy? Seriously, the answer to that question is going to shape the world we live in for years, maybe even decades to come.